The next speaker is Helen. She is the Vice President of Clinical Outcome Assessment, and she will present her talk now, and it's about a quality study to explore the content validity of the vitiligo patients' priority outcome measures. Please.
Today, I am presenting our study to develop vitiligo patient priority outcome measures. My disclosures are shown here, and the study was sponsored by Pfizer. On to the objectives and methods. The objective of the study was to develop content-valid, patient-reported outcome measures assessing the impact of vitiligo on adults and adolescents. We interviewed individuals living with vitiligo and expert dermatologists to ensure that the PRO measures developed were well understood, assessed important outcomes to patients, and were clinically relevant. The PRO measures were developed through an iterative process. First, we identified relevant concepts in previous qualitative research. Next, we held an item generation meeting with PRO experts from Pfizer and Clarivate to develop draft PRO measures. The draft measures were then reviewed by a study steering committee, including a clinical expert, Dr. Brett King of Yale Dermatology, and a patient advocate, Sharon King of Vitiligo. The PRO measures were then refined through qualitative interviews and reviewed again by the steering committee. The two draft measures are shown here. One was developed to assess the impact of facial vitiligo, and one was developed to assess the impact of total body vitiligo. And both a frequency scale and a severity scale were tested with patients for their preference. Patients were recruited via a specialist agency, clinical sites, and a Global Vitiligo Foundation advert. The interviews lasted 2 hours and included concept elicitation to explore the impacts of living with vitiligo and cognitive debriefing to explore the understanding and relevance of the draft PRO measures. Expert dermatologists were identified through their previous involvement in vitiligo research, and they participated in 1-hour interviews which included their top-line review of the draft measures. All of the interviews were audio recorded and transcribed, and the data were analysed using thematic analysis techniques. On to the results. The sample included 48 adults and 12 adolescents living with vitiligo. Diversity was obtained in Fitzpatrick skin type, age, sex, education level, race and ethnicity, and affected body surface area. Individuals described substantial impact on their emotional well-being, including feeling self-conscious, sad or depressed, worrying about the reactions of others, and expressing self-stigmatization. They also described substantial impact on their social functioning, including avoiding social situations, limiting their interactions with others, and impacts on their romantic relationships and intimacy. Overall, the two PROs were well understood by both adults and adolescents. The participants slightly preferred the rating scale where they rated the frequency of the impact instead of rating the severity of the impact. And the recall period was well understood when explained, but actually 55% used a longer recall period. We think this may have been due to the COVID-19 shelter-in-place restrictions at the time, meaning that the participants had not, for example, socialised in the past 7 days. Highly relevant items including feeling self-conscious, feeling as though vitiligo occupied their thoughts, feeling frustrated, insecure, sad, and worried. Low relevance items included the skin feeling rough to touch, feeling abandoned, and impact on relationships. However, this was based on a frequency count, and for those who did experience, for example, an impact on relationships, that experience could still be salient. The dermatologists were broadly aligned with the patient findings and mostly found the ViPPO measures to be comprehensive and relevant. Some recommendations were made to remove or to combine items. The measures were revised, and the changes are detailed here. 6 items were removed due to low relevance or redundancy with other items, and the frequency response scale was selected reflecting participant preference. The 7-day recall period was also retained, but we know now that this needs to be displayed more prominently. The revised measures are shown here. In conclusion then, two new PRO measures, the ViPPO-F and the ViPPO-T, have been developed, and they appear to be content valid, that is, they're well understood, comprehensive and relevant to individuals living with vitiligo. The ViPPO measures now need to be further refined and confirmed through psychometric validation. They also require linguistic and cultural validation and translation for use outside of the US. I would like to acknowledge my fellow authors and our steering committee and thank all the interview participants who shared their experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was a very interesting presentation and also of importance for the patients, I think, for the evaluation of our patients. I have a question for you in the context of cross-cultural validation. You mentioned this in your conclusion. Do you expect some difficulties for this?
I think it will be very interesting to see. I mean, our patient population here was a sample of patients living in the US, and we know, from the literature and previous studies that the impact of vitiligo is, is largely affected by social and geographic factors and different cultural factors. So, I think I wouldn't want to say that there absolutely wouldn't be differences. We might see certainly on some items being more salient in some countries than others, and I think that will be a really important and interesting next step for the study.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that some questions are maybe too sensitive for some cultures, for patients from other cultural backgrounds?
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, we did have a conversation about that with an item about impact on sex life, and some of the developers and some of those discussions were actually around, is that appropriate to ask in some cultures? Will some people find that offensive? And actually, in that case, it might just lead to missing data. So we made sure that when we were debriefing these items, we talked to the patients around the romantic relationships items to explore, did they also think about, impact on sex life and intimacy, and found that they did. So, that's potentially an item that can get at that concept without being found offensive to some people in some cultures.
Thank you. Any other questions? I can see still the raised hand. So, Samia, do you still have a question, or was this from the previous session? Your hand is raised?
That was from the previous session, sorry.
Okay, maybe you can delete that. Thank you. Okay, any more questions? No, I think
there's one on the Q&A.
Yes, exactly. So we received a question from Richard. How do you see the ViPPO being used in the future, particularly in contrast to the current tools that are available, like the VT-Qual, the LQI, etc.?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I think one of the things with patient-reported outcome measures is they're often developed for specific contexts of use and for different purposes as well. And one of the advantages that we see for the ViPPO measures is that we are able to get that separate score about that tells us about the impact of vitiligo on the face, separate to the body. And as we've heard from patients in our study, the impact of vitiligo on the face was the most bothersome for them, comparable to other areas of the body. So I think it's useful then for any studies where you want to be able to understand, say, how the changes in vitiligo on the face then result in a change for the patient in terms of emotional, social functioning. And obviously we're seeing in quite a lot of clinical trials now the VIS2021 score being an important endpoint. So to be able to draw that relationship between the improvements in the actual vitiligo on the face and what that means for the patients in terms of how they feel and function, I think is one way that the ViPPO measures can be used in those types of studies.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. There is a question from Professor Khaled Asseddin.
Thank you, Nanya. Just one question. I'm quite surprised that you only are looking on the face, which is, of course, we have the facial basis that's being validated, but it's a visible area, as are the hands. And why didn't you have a look at the hands? And how will you try to solve the difference between hands and face? Because usually when the face is affected, the hands are also affected. And I think there's something here that I don't fully understand.
Thank you. So we did develop two scales. So one is assessing the impact of vitiligo on the face, and the other is assessing the impact of vitiligo on the total body, which would include the hands in that score. You're right, it doesn't give you a specific impact of vitiligo on the hand score, though.
But it's quite strange because you choose the face because it is visible, and the hands are as visible as the face.
We based it on the patient data and what we heard from the patients in terms of the most bothersome areas, and the face came out as the most bothersome. The hands, I agree, were bothersome. I don't want to give you the wrong order. I think they were kind of second or third in the kind of relative importance that the patients gave us, but the face did come out as what they felt the most bothersome area to have vitiligo was.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.